Carmen Irving is a vital part of the team at Paxis, an evidence-based child behavior firm that helps schools, parents, and communities foster positive behavior in children and teens. You may have seen their effective, compassionate work in your local classroom. Carmen came on the show to discuss the science behind their work and how we can apply it as parents every day. If you haven't yet, please hit like and subscribe. You'd be surprised how much that helps. While you're at it, tell your friends, find us on Instagram and Facebook. Even back us on Patreon, where you can get early access and other goodies for just a few bucks a month. Thanks for being here today. Now let's get to work. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Safest Family on the Block. I'm your host, Jason, and joining me today is Carmen Irving. Carmen, hello. Thank you for coming today.
Thanks so much for having me, Jason.
This is a real treat. Carmen Irving is the Vice President for the Paxis Institute. Carmen has her master's degree in human development from Kent State University and is a certified family life educator and certified child and youth care professional. Carmen currently serves as the president-elect of the Ohio Council on Family Relations. Her career has been devoted to empowering youth and strengthening families, during which she has implemented evidence-based programs and has co-authored several curricula. It's Carmen's core belief that all children deserve nurturing adults who help support their success and development. And I'd love to start this interview with you today with just a story of my own real quick. If we can cast back our minds to the mid-70s, those of us who were around then to cast our minds back to it. I'm in first grade, and me and my buddy Joe and my buddy Travis, we snuck plastic spoons out of the kitchen at lunch for the specific purpose of grabbing the pea gravel that was there as the only safety thing underneath the play devices at the time, and using them as catapults to fling them at each other. I got hit in the eye, and then I did what I think was normal and expected for a 6-year-old who was hurt by a friend to do if they're a boy and they're 6 and it's the 70s and you're growing up in a logging town. So, short version, violence ensued. Fast forward 10 minutes later, I have a mild bloody nose, and I am over the knee of a 60-year-old teacher who is whacking me soundly on the butt with a ping pong paddle to teach me that violence is wrong. I'll just let that sink in there a little bit. Fast forward 40 years later, closer to 50 years later, and the Paxis Institute and similar programs have found better ways to raise children to be good, proactive, intelligent, emotionally intelligent adults, while also keeping classrooms from turning into some kind of Mad Max wasteland. And so could you talk to us a little bit, starting with Paxis Institute? What is it? Where did it come from? And how can it help parents and educators?
Absolutely. So Paxis Institute is in its nearly 40th year, just over 40 years, founded by Dr. Dennis Embry. So Dr. Embry, as we lovingly refer to him as Dr. Pax, really started his research right in graduate school, really looking at those behavioral strategies. So he's a trained psychologist, and how do we make some of those changes within children's environments based on just some evidence-based behavioral strategies. So Dr. Embry has really just leveraged the science and packaged it in a way that is intentional but useful for both educators and parents and caregivers. So when we talk about what Paxis Institute does, it's really taking the good science. We have 40 years of longitudinal research showing that Pax Good Behavior Game is actually the highest return on investment intervention or prevention intervention than any other intervention. So when we talk about Pax Good Behavior Game, what we're talking about is taking that set of strategies and using it in the context of a classroom. So this is not a manualized curriculum. We're not teaching teachers to pull a curriculum off the shelf and do this at 2 o'clock on a Tuesday. It's really using a set of standard operating procedures to guide the day. All of these really hinge on the nurturing environments framework, really understanding that we have to be intentional about creating that nurturing environment. And when we do that, we see a reduction in problematic behaviors. We see a reduction in toxic stress. We see an increase in psychological flexibility. We see an increase in physical safety for our kids. The other thing that we're really understanding is that when we talk about PACS, whether we're talking in school or we're talking in the community, we're really approaching behavior as a skill set. Let me say that again. When we think about all the things we teach kids, whether we're talking about potty training or tying shoes or driving a car, we understand that those are skills that kids have to learn. When we think about what we teach in school, in kindergarten, we're teaching kids how to line up, how to sit at their table or on the carpet. We're talking about reading, we teach mathematics. We approach behavior the same way. All that to say, we only use strategies that have been demonstrated effective. So to your point, Jason, we're done. Gone are the days where we're going to paddle kids to teach kids that violence is wrong. We're really going to lean into what the science has shown us to be effective. So when we talk about that school-based idea, we have 10 evidence-based strategies that layer onto one another. And what we're doing there is we're building kids' self-regulation. This is really playing off of that original Stanford marshmallow experiment, which said, hey, there's something to long-term outcomes for kids who can delay gratification. In a further iteration of that study, what we learned is that the adult plays a key component in that study. In other words, when kids perceive that adult as reliable, as predictable, as doing what they say they're going to do, that increases their ability to self-regulate. That's exactly what we're building in classrooms. So we're giving kids our very best chance to self-regulate. Go ahead. I see you want to ask a question.
Yeah, just I'm not sure everybody's familiar with the marshmallow study.
Sure.
Which is a fascinating illustration of one of the things you talk about: behavior as a skill, making good choices as a skill, rather than as a moral issue.
That's right. So,
and this really illustrates one of these points.
So in the classic marshmallow experiment, what we found is in the specific study that I'm talking about, this second study was done at Rochester in New York. And so the evaluator brings a young child in and says, hey, we're gonna draw a picture. Would you like to use my art supplies? And the kiddo says, yes, of course. And the evaluator says, well, would you like to use these broken busted up crayons, or would you like my super duper deluxe art set? And of course the kids pick the super duper deluxe art set. They say, okay, I'll be right back. Let me go get it. When they come back, of course, the researcher doesn't have the super duper deluxe. They have the broken up busted crayons and say, hey, no problem. You can still use these crayons. So for the kids who got the super duper deluxe, okay, researcher was reliable and consistent. The kids who got the busted up crayons, not so great. So they start drawing their picture. A few minutes later, evaluator says, hey, you know what? It's snack time. Here's a marshmallow. And they give the child the marshmallow. And they say, but I'll tell you what, if you can wait until I get back, I'll give you 2 marshmallows. So these kids are bright, right? They know 2 marshmallows is better than 1 marshmallow. So as you can probably guess, Jason, the kids who received the super duper deluxe art set were able to delay getting that second marshmallow 4 times longer than the other kids. So the other kids who didn't have the researcher come through for them the first time thought, what's the likelihood they're really going to come back with my second marshmallow? Go on to eat the marshmallow. And as on average, kids were able to wait about 3 minutes for the second marshmallow in the broken, busted up crayon group. And the kids who had the reliable evaluator, they were able to make it just over 12 minutes, so more than 4 times longer. The point here is that we know the perception of being a reliable and consistent adult has enormous impact on a young person's ability to self-regulate. The other reason we want to really talk about self-regulation is that self-regulation is one of those skills we can build in all of our kids. So that's a skill we want to hone, and it has profound impact for the rest of their lives. This is not a kindergarten thing. This isn't a second grade thing. This isn't a 6th grade thing. This is when kids have more self-regulation, they have better outcomes. And we're talking about everything from high school graduation, going on to college. BMI is even determined really by self-regulation. So when we talk about long-term healthy outcomes for young people, we see an enormous difference when it comes to self-regulation or that delay of gratification.
And that makes sense. I mean, adults are going to trust adults that they know do what they say they're going to do.
That's
and
right.
Kids are smart, and all they do at birth is pay attention, and they continue to do that.
That's right.
And,
that's exactly
and
right.
I wanted to touch on the classic marshmallow story. If I remember this correctly, I also got my degree in developmental psychology. That was more than 30 years ago. So
go ahead, take it away.
But,
go to the Stanford experiment.
If I remember correctly, the child is given the choice of one marshmallow now or 2 marshmallows later.
That's right.
And they were mostly trying to figure out at what age the average kid went for the 2 marshmallows.
That's right.
To kind of determine what age the kids were starting to be able to make that kind of decision.
Smash the break, yeah.
Yeah, and it was old enough that it impacts, I think, this whole idea of disciplining our kids and getting them to self-regulate, because there's a lot of things children they can't even do yet, that unfortunately the school system and parents start punishing them for not doing, even though they not only haven't developed the skill yet, they're literally developmentally incapable of demonstrating that skill yet.
You bring up a great point, Jason, and some of this is about developmentally appropriateness, but also, again, let's kind of think about what's going on. When we're talking about scarcity, kids are going to get while the getting's good. And so it's better to have a marshmallow than having to wait for that second if I have no reason to believe you're going to follow through on that. That's where that delay of gratification is critical. So when we think about PAX, and I know because our focus is so much on family-based, I'll speak a little less about school-based. I always start in school because that's where we started. You know, when we think about PAX Good Behavior Game, its origins are in school. It's really using that context of a classroom to create that nurturing environment, to teach teachers to be reliable and consistent, to be intentional about teaching behavior as a skill set. And the way we teach behavior as a skill set is by using those evidence-based strategies. Those evidence-based strategies, for example, the first one is really talking about a vision. So rather than walking into a classroom with a set of rules, we're really talking more about having a unified vision. So setting expectations together. So you can imagine that students are more successful in reaching expectations when they're part of making that process.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, that makes sense.
Some other strategies which are filled with science, but so nuanced it's often missed. Beat the timer. So when you think about any video game that any kid's ever played, whether we're talking about leapfrog through some very violent video games that are out there, they all have one thing in common, and that's the element of a timer. What we know about the timer is that that's really exciting to the brain. When we have that timer, what it does is it allows us to focus, block out distractions. So we teach teachers how to use that timer to, one, help keep kids on task. Let's block out distractions and really have that laser point focus. The other thing it does is it gives kids some light at the end of the tunnel. How many times have we asked kids to do things they really despise doing? For example, you have a child who really has a difficult time reading, and now it's time to write a poem, or we're going to do open journaling for the next 15 minutes. That is excruciating. So having the timer really gives them an opportunity to say, I don't have to make it forever. This isn't going to last forever. I've only got to make it to the light at the end of the tunnel, whether it's 7 minutes or 10 minutes, whatever that is. We can talk about that. But really leveraging the science base around behavior change, really giving kids the support they need to be successful. The other thing I like about, and I get excited about Beat the Timer, the other thing I like talking about with this is that it's not just about having more on-task behavior in a classroom. It's not just about the self-regulation. The self-regulation is critical. We're going to see that as kids age up, but it's also really that deliberate teaching of a new skill. So some of these are skills that kids are going to carry with them for the rest of their lives. I give my son as a really good example. Beat the timer is a strategy we used when he was young. Then all of a sudden, as he got a little older, that became a strategy I didn't need to do anymore. He owned it. He already knew how to do it. And the example I love to give is when he was studying for the ACT. So it was time to do the ACT. He wanted, he was going to a kind of competitive school, wanted to make sure he had the best possible score, which meant probably brushing up. And so he said, hey, do you want me to buy you the ACT study guide? Yeah. And I think he thought it was like buying him a cheat. The thing comes from Amazon. It's like the size of the Chicago phone book. It's huge. So again, how do you begin to master that? And so he was using the timer on his own to kind of set the timer, manage studying for a bit, give himself a break, and really build up that endurance that it takes to take a giant test like the ACT, which I think is now like 4 hours long. So it's an example for me of, this isn't just something we're doing to our kids. This is really something these are some skills we're giving them to carry for a lifetime. We see this among our professionals all the time. As professionals, you and I, Jason, don't call it beat the timer, but there's huge research around time boxing, which is the idea where we're going to block out distractions. All we're going to do is focus on this email or this thing that we're writing. And when the timer goes off, then we can get our coffee, or then we can check Facebook or whatever that reward is. So
see also the Pomodoro method, which is kind of an adult education, the same thing. And also real quick, for any viewers who don't know about this, a phone book was an archaic tool that we used to use where somebody would print out a portion of the internet so that we would be able to contact people.
Jason, you did not tell me that you'd be insulting me and my age by the time
I suspect I'm much more insultable about my age than you, ma'am. But no, that's very interesting. Again, I like how that beat the timer, it gamifies things, which kids like. And then it's the beginnings of building that skill. It's push-ups for the brain.
It is push-ups for the brain. And the idea gamify, you're 100% right, but we're not really gamifying. The researchers who went into the development of video games happen to know the brain science. So this isn't necessarily us leveraging a game as much as it is leveraging the reward-seeking tendency of the brain, right? That's exactly the way the brain works. We like dopamine. And so that's exactly what happens as those seconds tick down in that timer. You see that on-task behavior. And where that gamify comes in, you sit in a first grade class and say, okay, guys, we're going to pack up our cubbies. What are a couple things we need to do? Remember, we're going to have walking feet. We're going to have hands by our sides. We're going to go to our cubbies. We're going to grab our lunchbox, our take-home folder, and our backpack. Time starts now. And I'm, as the teacher, giving some feedback. It gives my kids a tangible goal. They're able to be successful. And today, when they do it in 37 seconds, when it's time to talk about it tomorrow, I can say, guys, we did that in 37 seconds. You think we can beat our time? I don't know. That's pretty fast. What do you think? And so there's some of that soft competition in there as well, which is good for them.
Standing. And this is, again, evidence-based. The PAC system in general is, I feel like a lot of child rearing methods, and some that I've used and many that were used on me, were, hey, this seems like it makes sense. Let's go give it a try.
Sure.
And then in your own family with a very small sample size, you figure out what worked or what didn't work. Whereas PAX is built from structured studies,
that's right.
Hypotheses turning into theories, turning into practices, and then coming up with, this is what works most of the most frequently for the largest spectrum of the population.
I'm so glad you brought that up. So when we talk about evidence-based, let's talk about what that really means. We hear this term evidence-based all the time. Evidence-based means it's been proven, it's been demonstrated. And so when we talk about PAC's Good Behavior Game, there are 55 randomized control trials, all with publications looking at the effectiveness of PAC's Good Behavior Game and its long-term outcomes. There are now more than 112 published papers on PAC's Good Behavior Game. Coming out of the Washington State School for Public Policy, we are the highest return on investment for a universal prevention intervention, which means for every dollar spent on PAX Good Behavior Game, we save about $67 in public money. And where that comes from is, again, back to self-regulation. As kids have better outcomes, so think about how this gets tracked. These are longitudinal studies. So we watch kids in PAX classrooms in elementary. Most of those studies are in the 1st and 2nd grade. And so as these kids had PAX Good Behavior Game in school in the 1st or 2nd grade, and they age up, and now they become young adults around 19, 20, 21 years old, we see very different outcomes than their counterpart peers who weren't in PAX classrooms. The kids who are in PAX classrooms are more likely to have some of those really positive things like graduating high school, going on to college, lower pregnancy rates for unintended pregnancy in high school. We also see a lower rate in substance misuse, their own violent crime, their own mental health diagnosis, their own need for special education. And so again, it all distills back to this idea of self-regulation.
Now you use the term prevention intervention. Is that hyphenated or is there a slash between them?
Hyphenated. So
what is that?
Lots of words here. So universal means everyone gets it. So often when we think about, so again, I keep talking about behavioral health strategies, we're often thinking about intervention. Someone needs help. When we talk about prevention, we're talking about everybody. We're getting upstream before an issue occurs, we're getting in there. So universal means every single person. So in a classroom, we're doing it for all the kids, not just some of the kids. It's not a select audience, it's all of them. When we talk about prevention, we mean, hey, we haven't identified an issue per se. We're going to give you kind of a behavioral inoculation, if you will. We want to be ahead of it. When we talk about intervention, this is really coming from the research world, not intervention as in, hey, we have a problem and we're intervening. Intervention just means that was the treatment. So when we're studying one classroom that had PAX and one classroom without PAX, the intervention there was PAX Good Behavior Game. So it's a research word.
Okay, excellent. Now, I have a question about, actually, I'll ask that question in a little bit. We're talking about programs that you've built to help kids make better decisions that eventually become good adult decisions, rather than the responding to kids acting out.
That's right.
I remember from back when I ran a karate school for a long time, if there was a kid zoning out, squirreling off in class, and you came down on him, sometimes it would work, most of the time it wouldn't. But man, if you complimented the kid standing next to him for doing the right thing, it was like a Jedi mind trick.
Yeah, your squirrel would get on board, right?
Because they want that positive attention too. I am certain that the PAX program has its own Jedi mind tricks, and I think that the Beat the Clock game is one of them. What are a couple others?
So lots of strategy. So we have 10 evidence-based kernels that build up to then build the PAX Good Behavior Game. So a total of 11 strategies. A few that I gave you as examples, like PAX Vision, where we're really setting expectations. PAX Leader, where we're really having a set of language that encompasses all of our kids to really reinforce exactly as you're saying, the behavior we want more of. We use a trauma-informed evidence-based strategy, which is the harmonica for gaining kids' attention. So when we're in a loud group and we're transitioning, we're going to blow that harmonica and gain their attention. We talk about our own version of Granny's Wacky Prizes. So kids, teachers are so burned out on prizes. They're used to having to buy candy and stickers and erasers and trinkets and pink Cadillacs, the whole gamut. Now here what we're talking about is really using those very quick, in the moment, typically physical in nature. So we've had really positive behavior. I'll go back to my cubbies. We were packing up for the day. We beat the timer. Now to ritually reinforce that, what we're going to say is, you know what? We just earned a Granny's Wacky Prize. We're all going to lay on the floor and shake like, or sizzle like bacon for the next 30 seconds. So we're burning up some energy, but we're really using that good brain science, giving them a dopamine release to reinforce that and say, yes, just like that.
We're breaking up the routine in a predictable manner.
Absolutely. And we're having a little fun. There's nothing wrong with really building that relationship between the kids and their peers, the students and the peers, the students and the teachers. There are several others, but some of the highlights I want to hit, really thinking about Toodle notes, where we're very intentional about commenting through a written note about the behavior we want to see more of. So when Jason lines up with his hands by his side and isn't ripping artwork off the walls as he heads to the bathroom, as he often does, I'm going to write him a note and say, Jason, I noticed so you were using your hands by your side with your walking feet in the hall. I really appreciate it. Shows me how respectful you are. Way to be a PAX leader, from Mrs. Irving. So again, can't do a whole training and the we're here together, but really giving the idea, what I want to convey here is that, one, these are all feel good, but that's not where they came from. They're science. So this isn't magic. That's not tips and tricks. It really and truly is taking the science and leveraging that to make a more manageable classroom environment that supports kids and gives them what they need for the long haul.
So I have a couple of impertinent questions. And the first one is, I'm familiar with PAX from, it's used in my school district, and so it's been used with my kids. Why a harmonica? That seems it's kind of out of left field. But I get the sense that it was very intentional, and that if the science had predicted that a hurdy-gurdy would work, there'd be hurdy-gurdies in every classroom that buys PAX. So why a harmonica?
Why a harmonica? Well, first of all, the harmonica is trauma informed. So let me say what I mean by that. We have lots of effective ways. I'm not going to endorse any of them, but lots of effective ways to get kids' attention. So Jason, when you and I were in school, if our teacher needed our attention, they would clap their hands. And when you think about what clapping hands sounds like, for many of us, it's innocuous, means nothing. But you get to some communities and kids will tell you that sounds just like gunfire. You get to other kids and they'll tell you it sounds just like hitting or slapping. And so what I mean by trauma informed is as much as all the teacher intended to do is to gain the student's attention, sometimes we lose our kids because we put them in that fight, flight, or freeze state of mind. Because what we wanted was their attention. What we did is triggered something else. Same is true when we think about the flashing lights. So when I was a kid, my teacher would go and turn off the lights to get our attention. If that wasn't enough, she would flicker the lights to get our attention. What we know now is that that's really overwhelming, particularly for any of our kids who have some sensory sensitivities. It's too much. So the harmonica, we know, is just a nice neutral. Kids don't have a lot of trauma associations with harmonicas. It's a trauma-informed tone in that it does not elicit that fight, flight, or freeze response. So that's where it comes from. The other part is it's novel. So you want to gain kids' attention, it's novel. The other part to that is it's portable. I can stick it around my neck. Another really nice trauma-informed tone is the wind chime. But as you can imagine, I cannot easily equip school teachers with wind chimes to carry through the school. So that's exactly where the harmonica comes from. Well, we're talking about safety with the harmonica. As wacky as the harmonica can feel for some of our teachers at the onset, where the buy-in really comes, where they commit to doing it, even if it's out of their comfort zone at first, is this idea of a shared language and a shared sense of safety. And here's what I mean by this. If I'm a school teacher and I have this call and response, I need their attention. I say peanut butter, kids say jelly back to me and it works. I get their attention, fine. And then, Jason's got like a big booming voice. So he walks into the cafeteria and needs their attention, says, listen up, everyone. And everyone listens up. Great. But I don't have a shared set of expectations. So if I'm the administrator, I'm the substitute, I'm the music teacher, and I need their attention, it's only as good as everyone else's system. When we're all consistent using the harmonica, we just have shared expectations. So it doesn't matter whether Jason blows the harmonica or I blow the harmonica or the sub who's in the building for the day blows the harmonica, everyone knows what to do when they hear the harmonica. The other part that comes into that really, again, we hope we never need to think about, but is a safety concern, is that in the event of a crisis, and I've got seconds to get kids' attention, we're all singing from the same songbook. So in those moments of utter chaos, they hear the harmonica, they know exactly what they're supposed to do.
Well, I had predicted it would be intentional, and clearly it was.
Yeah, it wasn't an accident.
Now, on the topic of buy-in, and this is one where I can predict some parental responses, and I'm sure you've had this pushback as well, where
Sure.
there is, I think there are a number of parents out there, and I'm pretty sure that my parents would have been that way, who, for example, hey, buddy, you did a great job not wrecking the classroom today. I think there's a perception with a lot of parents and still even educators that we're not going to compliment the kids for something they should clearly not be doing, or some behavior that is just baseline.
Sure.
And I think the evidence runs contrary to that viewpoint. But what do you guys say when you get that pushback from a parent or a teacher?
So we haven't had, honestly, Jason, that's not a big one.
Good.
So we do certainly, if the example I gave was the pulling the artwork.
Yeah.
If that's an issue that I want to correct specifically with you, I'm certainly going to do that. Because what I want to reinforce there is not ripping off the art from the walls. What I complimented, if you remember when I tutored you, is walking down the hall with your hands by your side. That's the behavior I want more of.
Okay.
So when we talk about PAX, we're going to be intentional to give our energy to the behaviors we want more of. That's not to say that we don't set expectations and have limits around the behaviors we don't want. But what we know is that there's only so much time and energy to give. Kids want our time and they want our energy. So we want to model what we want more of. We want to really call our big animation on the stuff we want more of. So it doesn't mean I'm not going to correct you, but I'm not going to give you a big response for it, though, where you're going to get the quote payoff, where I'm expressive and I'm giving you attention, and the high fives are in the thank you so much for doing fill in the blank, walking down the hall with your hands by your side.
Outstanding.
One of the things I wanted to make sure to speak to before we transition to community-based is sort of those short-term outcomes, because I think that particularly in the times we're living in today in classrooms, we ask a lot of our teachers. And so I've spent a lot of time saying, like, do it for the kids, those long-term outcomes, they go on to have really great lives when they've got self-regulation. But I want to talk about some of those short-term outcomes. So how do we get teachers to blow harmonicas? How do we get teachers to set timers? How do we get teachers to tootle kids? Because it works. We see immediate short-term outcomes as well. So we see at full implementation, when teachers are using the kernels and playing the Pax Good Behavior game, we see between 60 and 90 minutes a day of increased instruction. Where that comes from, so that's huge. I know, I see your eyebrows, that's huge. Where that comes from is we're not losing all that time in off-task behavior, particularly around transitions. So we're really able to get more from our kids. It's probably no surprise to see that in PAX classrooms, we have higher reading and math test scores regardless of curriculum. So it doesn't matter which of the curricula they're using for reading or math. We see higher test scores. Go back to my earlier statement, we're teaching more every single day because we don't have kids off task. So I just wanted to share that because I think that sometimes, again, with my background, what motivates me is really thinking about, like, we have this opportunity with all these kids right now to give them what they need to get them where they're headed. But I want to make sure I speak to sort of those shorter term outcomes. We're not waiting for these kids to turn 20 to see the good effects. As you can imagine, we also see a decrease in teacher stress, teacher burnout, and teacher sick days. So when we talk about PAX, it's not just for the kids, it's for the teachers too.
Well, you got my buy-in on making transitions go quicker. If I can cut 10 minutes off and getting the kids in the car on the way somewhere, good
Absolutely.
Lord. All right.
Well, I know that we're coming close on time, so
Yeah.
I wanna transition to community-based because I think that
Mhm.
that's probably going to be a good place for some of our listeners to start.
Yeah.
So, as Pax Good Behavior Game has really had a presence internationally, there's always been this, what do we have on the parenting side of things? How do we do this and pick a place, whether it's Sunday schools, after school programs, parenting workshops, how do we do this? And so PAX Tools is the community-based derivative of PAX Good Behavior Game. It's taking many of the same strategies and using the same science, but making the application make sense outside of a classroom. It's also eliminating a couple of those strategies that are so specific to a classroom and sprinkling in some that have more flexibility in those community-based applications, whether we're talking about in homes, in after school environments, even in our some of our behavioral health, like inpatient or juvenile justice. So making sure that really, regardless of where we interface with young people, we're really using that rich science and making sure that adults have the supports they need to be effective with kids. So when we talk about PAX Tools, we have a couple of trainings. One is the PAX Tools for Human Services, which is really for all of our human services workers, whether we're talking about behavioral health technicians, clinicians, practitioners, foster care providers, wraparound facilitators, anyone who's really plugging into the system to be really trained in a trauma-informed approach and how to operationalize those evidence-based strategies. PAX Tools for Community Educators is really that training that trains our community educators. So think about our parenting educators, our public health educators, our extension educators. These are people who oftentimes are working directly with parents, right? They're trained to then do parenting education. So those educators are trained to deliver 9 evidence-based strategies in parenting workshops. We also offer all of these educators are doing these things virtually right now with COVID, but really understanding how we use those strategies at home in a home application. So I gave a couple of examples in school-based. I'd like to kind of crosswalk those and talk about what they look like at home, if that's okay with you.
Absolutely.
So when we think about PAX Vision, I gave a classroom example. Jason gave the example of getting out of the house. So one of the things we know, particularly with young children, like getting out the door for school can just feel like do or die, because the minute we're late, they're tardy for school, we're late for work, or missing the bus, it's so chaotic, it's so stressful. So using that vision tool, we're really talking about what do we need to hear, see, feel, and do more of. So to make this morning routine, what do we need to do more of? What should I see? What should we be doing? What should I be hearing? What do we need less of? So our kids will say, like, we may say we need to see less TV on. Kids may say, I need to hear less screaming or less nagging at me. And so really kind of getting on the same page. Again, this is prevention work. So we're not doing this in the moment. We're planning for this the night before, the day before, really talking about what this should look like. That way we've got an action plan when it's time to get ready for school in the morning, rather than us waiting till we're about to pop and yelling. We're ahead of the game and say, remember, what are the 3 things we need to do, right? So we're building a plan. Beat the timer, perfect example here. So beat the timer is a human strategy. Again, the way it's been packaged is for children, but this is a human behavioral strategy. So I may need to use the timer to really talk about, like, how much time do we have for breakfast? How much time remains for us to get our backpack, our shoes, and our lunchbox, whatever those things are. So really leveraging that timer. For some of our older kids, it may be setting the timer and letting them go just so they have that visual timer. You've got 30 minutes to get your stuff done. For some of our kids, our littles, they need lots of tasks timed in little amounts. So it might be brushing our teeth. It might be, setting the timer. By the time the timer goes off, we need to be dressed, or, how many minutes remain for eating breakfast. But time is such an abstract construct for our littles, that really giving them small attainable goals, scaffold success, so that we're ultimately making this getting out of the house an easier task.
And to the point that you brought up very early, that if we start out with, we got 10 minutes to get out the door, that's 2 minutes of teeth brushing, 3 minutes to get dressed, and 5 minutes of breakfast. After a couple of years, it's 10 minutes to be at the door ready to go. And 15 years after that, they're successfully planning their morning and getting to work and dividing their tasks and kicking butt in a career.
Thank you so much for saying that, Jason. I don't want to give the impression that for the rest of our lives, or until the kids, head out of our nest, that we're setting the timer. What we're really doing is we're teaching a skill set. So we didn't say we're not going to tie our kids' shoes, or we're not going to help them tie their shoes because they need to learn how to do that on their own. The way they learn to tie their shoes, that we teach them how to tie their shoes. We don't sit down with the chapter book with a kid on our lap, attempt to read it, they don't get it, and say, well, reading's not in the cards for you. It's a scaffold approach. And so same idea here. We're going to start low and slow. We're going to build success. We're going to build confidence. We're going to get on the same page, and then they're going to take it. I don't set the timer for my kids anymore, because they can do it on their own. But to expect that kids are just going to naturally know how to run a routine without some guidance is not going to go well. And in those really stressful moments, and I think this is where it's just, in my opinion, so critical for parents, we don't always bring like our best face forward when we're in stress. Like, I'm trying to get ready for work, and the coffee is not made, and the phone is ringing, and I didn't intend to talk to my mother in the middle of all of that, so when those moments happen, we don't always have the best default. So it's just being planful and kind of getting ahead of it, doing it with intention. And in addition to doing it with an intention, let's leverage some really good science.
And I love that you said intention, the idea of mindfully, intentionally, based on a plan you made when you weren't under stress.
That's it. It's right there.
Walking through those crux points of the day and of our kids' behavior and of our kids' decision making.
The other thing that, again, this is probably a little bit more Carmen Irving and less Paxis Institute. So when we talk Paxis, we're leveraging that science-based period. But what I appreciate about this, so Paxis, they're going to talk about leveraging that science base, building skill sets. The Carmen Irving part of this says, my time is so limited with my kids that if in the moment, if I can make toothbrushing exciting, if I can have a win that's good for my relationship, I'll take it. Because it's hard. Being a mom or being a dad is hard work, and we're just running a busy rodeo. So if I can get my kids to school and feel like it went pretty well, I've set them up for a good day, and I'm not, struggling with mom guilt, that is a win. When I'll share a brief story. For a short period of time, for about a year, I fostered my two nieces, and my nieces are exactly 10 years younger than my bigs. And so I was out of practice. I had a rough day. Like, I thought my daycare days were done. And so, that morning is stressful, getting lunches done, getting breakfast done, making sure everyone's got what they need, getting the bigs out the door, getting the oldest little out the door on the bus, and then I would take my niece to daycare. So she's a squirrel, as you say. She's just off task all the time. So it was constant work, a lot of reminders and visioning and using the timer. And so what we had was a Dixie cup of popsicle sticks. So I had a set of popsicle sticks that were only hers. They lived in a Dixie cup in the cup holder of my car. And as long as we had met the goals and had like a backpack and a coat and shoes on our feet, she had earned herself a quote prize in the car. These prizes could only be things that we could do while I'm driving the car. And so sometimes it was playing the animal game, sometimes it was playing the color game. And the color game isn't what you thought it was. The color game was where my niece got to pick a color, and whatever color she picked, anytime we saw a house that was that color, I had to honk the horn. And so I would, luckily, daycare was just a little over a mile, because I was literally honking the horn every time there was a blue house. And so all that to say, simple. It was a great dopamine response for her. It's a really pleasant memory of this really stressful time where, you know, I was providing foster care, but talking about some of those just relationship deposits that I was able to make, and what could have easily just been a hectic morning, or easily I'm on my cell phone taking care of business on the way to daycare, was a way to really be in the space for that 1 mile drive with my niece and I. And so I love that. I love that spend that PAX ensures in relationships.
That's hugely important. I have to say that in the time that I've done this show, the interviews I've done, the suicide counselor we had on, the communication specialist we had on, the SVU specializing in child abuse that we had on, the child trafficking specialist we had on, the Navy SEAL turned bodyguard we had on, all of them agree that your first line of prevention is keeping a relationship with our kids where they feel safe approaching us with their problems, where they feel that we're dependable and reliable and on their side. And it seems like this method helps ensure that through mindfulness, and also just kind of accepting fully that certainly for the first 10 years, your kids' behavior, your kids' choices are much more in your wheelhouse and not fully their responsibility.
That's what the science tells us, right, Jason? We know that kids are watching what we do. And I think that this is a very difficult time to be a parent. We're in direct competition with a lot of social media these days. But if I, again, speaking more Carmen Irving and less Paxis, like, just keep parenting, just keep talking, just keep doing, because they're listening.
Just keep parenting, just keep parenting, just keep parenting.
Right, just parenting. Yeah. Absolutely.
Oh, you said something I wanted to bring to your attention about making toothbrushing fun.
Yeah.
These people do not pay me. But there's a podcast called Chompers that is a 2-minute podcast where they give you facts or tell you jokes, and every 30 seconds tell you to switch which quadrant of the mouth. And it is, I hope these people get $1 billion, because it has fundamentally changed toothbrushing time in our house.
Oh, I love that. I love that.
And it's just called Chompers. It's a podcast. It's free. I think they're sponsored by Colgate or Crest or something like that. But they don't pay me, viewers. But seriously, if you have toothbrushing drama, this is the solution.
That's where it is.
That's it. So, Carmen, thank you so much for coming on today. And before you go, is there something that you hold dear to your heart that you just don't get enough opportunities to talk about?
Oh, anything I hold dear to my heart that I just don't get to talk about. Jason, I feel like I got to do that for the last hour.
Excellent.
I think that's it. I think we did it.
All right.
I do want to extend, I think that I guess I want to make sure that I offer something to your listeners. I think it's one thing to be interested or fascinated by it, but I'm going to make sure that anyone who's interested in learning more has a way to do so. So if it's just curiosity, going to the website will certainly take care of some of that curiosity. That's Paxis, PAXIS.org. If it's, hey, how do I get trained? I want to go through one of those parenting workshops. Sending me a direct email, I can certainly link people to a free workshop.
Oh, that would be fantastic. I'll make sure that that's in the show notes below, viewers, for anybody who's interested.
Certainly. Thank you so much for having me, Jason.
Thank you, Carmen. This was fantastic. I really appreciate it. Thank you for watching, everybody. Thank you, Carmen.
Thank
you. Bye for now. Stay safe.
Today's episode was brought to you by our heroes over at Patreon: Todd Elner, Beth Edwards, Douglas Sedevy, Hugh O'Donnell, Art Brick, American Institutes of Kenpo, Beth Pratt, Richard Hubbard, Wayfinder Advantage, Kit Bradley, Lee Douglas, Amy Rivers, Neil Fastine, Kate Carlson, Ron Payton, Jenny Coakley, and Chris Jordan. Join the illustrious heroes by backing us at patreon.com/safestfamily. If you can't, that's okay, but do consider liking us and subscribing here on YouTube or sharing your favorite episodes on social media. Even a little bit on your end can make a lot of difference here. Thank you for watching today. Stay safe. We'll see you next time.